Jerry Lynn may not have been the biggest individual to ever step into the ring, but his determination and work ethic, as well as his athletic skills, would take him to some of the greatest professional wrestling organizations over a career that has spanned more than 3 decades. He's still working in the business. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me.
You know, I have to wonder, because when all you have to say is Jerry Lynn, and everybody knows who you are. But you had other.
I don't know I'm sorry. A lot of times I get who.
Yeah. Well, so do I. That's my Sean Mooney who. But that's Bobby Heenan who coined that one. But no, that's not. I know that isn't the case in the world of professional wrestling, Jerry. But you did have some other gimmicks along the way, and I think just because they were awful, I mean, like Golgotha Cross. Is that really one of the gimmicks you had?
It was only a one-time thing I was in a masked man tournament for Michinoku Pro over in Japan.
Yeah.
And they had the mask they wanted me to wear, and it was called Golgotha Cross. And that was it. That's the only time I wore it, was during that tournament. And I ended up losing the mask to Grand Naniwa in a mask versus mask match near the end of the tournament.
Yeah, and was there a Jerry the Ram?
No. What happened? What happened there was a friend of mine in Denver called me up and he asked if he got the outfits made, if I would do a team Ram Jam with him. Yeah. So I think it was on I don't know. It was a show that was just for fun, kind of. It was just where the whole crew kind of dresses up in different weird, wacky gimmicks. So we did the Team Ram Jam, and I was Jerry the Ram, and he was Grimmy Jam, and I still have the outfit. Then I used it one more time in Austin, Texas, right around Anarchy Championship Wrestling's Halloween show. So I wore that because everyone kind of had fun and dressed up in different gimmicks for their Halloween show. Yeah.
Well, people remember, I know also Mr. JL and your days at the WCW, and we'll talk about that. But I mean, Jerry Lynn worked pretty damn well for you over all these years. So I'm glad that for the most part you stuck with that. That was that's a good choice.
I could never think of a weird, wacky gimmick or a showbiz name, so I just used my name, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it worked. You're from Minnesota originally, correct? And
correct.
It's just amazing. It seems like every guest I have on, and we have this wide range of guests from all walks of life, but so many have ties to Minnesota. And we just had Warlord on, and of course he's from Minnesota. What is it about that state in professional wrestling?
I think just because of the history there, because the AWA had been there for so long, and a lot of great wrestlers have come out of there.
Yeah, I mean, you think of Vern Gagne, and of course we've heard the tales of Robbinsdale High and a few others from Henry, I think, in that area. Did you know a lot about these guys then? I mean, you're not that far off in age with them, but was there kind of a legend about that group early on, even when you were growing up in that area? I mean, I think you're from Minneapolis, so those guys people must have known about them.
Well, I really didn't know about them till I broke into the business. Then I realized everyone was nuts.
Yeah. But did you know Joe and Mike and Hegstrand and Rick Rude and all these guys, or did you meet them later on?
Later on, and I didn't realize, because when I was young, when I turned of age to drink in Minneapolis, you only had to be 19. In Wisconsin was 18. Anyway, I went to a bar one time with some friends after work called Grandma B's.
Yep.
And I remember seeing a guy, the bouncer, had like the largest arms I've ever seen in my life. And and this was years before I got in the business, because I didn't break in until I was 25, and I was probably about 19 or 20 at the time. And I didn't realize till years later, that it was Hawk who was bouncing at the bar.
Wow. Yeah.
But I'll never forget seeing how big his arms were. They were bigger than my thighs. It was crazy.
Yeah. I can't imagine they ever had a fight in that place, considering the bouncers that they had between Joe Laurinaitis and, these guys were just giant monsters, and a bunch of them worked at Grandma B's. It's very, very famous spot as far as how many of those guys either worked there or hung out there.
Yeah, I'd heard later on that Hawk and Animal both worked there, and I don't know who else, but
oh yeah, it was
a lot of the guys. It was a tight knit circle back then.
Yeah. So, but growing up there, so how did you get involved in wrestling? Was it something? I mean, you were a fan as a kid, and I know you weren't big in stature. I mean, you didn't weigh a lot. I think I heard you in one interview talking you weighed about 150 pounds, I think, when you got out of high school or in that area. I mean, you weren't a big kid at all.
Oh, no. When I was my senior year in high school, I was I was wrestling in the 132 pound division.
Wow.
And that was a senior.
Yeah.
And, after school, I, started work. I kept on working out a little bit, and then I kind of quit, and I'd played a few seasons of adult recreational soccer and stuff. So I always kept, physically active and stuff. But a friend of mine started dating a wrestler, and he did a Russian gimmick in the AWA, and his name was Soldat Ustinov.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to go watch him wrestle on I think it was an indie show at the Bellray Ballroom I think it was in Fridley.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met him after the show and told him, I was a huge wrestling fan. I grew up watching it. And he said, well, why don't you try it? And I'm thinking to myself, I told him, I said, there's no way, I'm too small. And he says, well, no, they'll match you up with guys your size. Yeah, right, they do.
Right.
But he introduced me to Ed Sharkey, and I went down and met him at his training camp at the time, and I knew I wasn't ready, and I kind of had a feeling that Eddie was just after my money, because I was only 155 pounds, probably soaking wet. So I just put it on the back burner, and I thought, well, I'll just start working out again, and maybe in a couple of years, if I think, if I'm ready, I'll try for it then. So a couple of years later, I was actually laying telephone cable underground for a job, and a guy I was working with, we would go to the gym and work out together. His name was Todd Becker, and he found out about Brad Runyan's camp, and he told me, he says, Brad's throwing a camp together at the last minute. He said he's giving a big discount, so you want to try it? And I said, sure. So took out a loan and went to Brad's camp, and that's how it all started.
Oh, so were you a good amateur? You mentioned you wrestled. Did you have some success in that? Where did the basis of you thinking that maybe you could do this? Where did that come from?
Well, I had done a few sports. I had done gymnastics, basketball, soccer, and track, and I thought, well, I got recruited to try wrestling. So I tried it, and I ended up I only wrestled my senior year in high school, and I ended up winning a state and a national invitational tournament.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That 1 year you just picked it up, and then you were that successful in one year?
Well, I didn't know a lot of moves or anything, but I think I just attribute it to my balance from gymnastics. And even my coach was shocked. And my coach was married, and actually had help from a couple other great wrestlers. The Hayeswinkles were twin brothers who were medalists in the Olympic Games in Greco-Roman, and then they had a younger brother who helped out with our team. And so, but I didn't know a lot of moves, but I could just kind of sense when someone was a little off balance, and I could just kind of flip over and end up on top of them. My coach was even puzzled by it. He says, it looks like you're about to be taken down, and somehow you end up on top of them. So that, and then I tried to go to Anoka Ramsey Community College and join the wrestling team, and then I was just messing around with some friends, and I ended up separating my shoulder, and that was the end of my amateur career. But that was early on. So years later, I just thought, well, we'll give pro wrestling a shot.
Well, and we're talking, I guess, mid-'80s when you probably started to get serious about it. Were you seeing, what was going on, of course, at the time with the WWF and some of the success of these other organizations that you thought that it might be a career where you could actually make a living? I mean, what was it that you were seeing going on in the world of professional wrestling at that time?
Well, probably in the mid 80s is when we finally got cable, and then you could see every territory around the country. You could see Portland, Florida, Georgia, Continental, Mid-South, World Class with the Von Erich Freebird feud. I mean, every territory was hot, and I was loving it because all these years growing up, all I knew of was the AWA.
Yeah.
And so it was exciting to be able to see all this other stuff. And it was wrestlers that you would see in the wrestling magazines.
Right.
But when I broke in, I didn't have any aspirations of, I didn't right away think I'm going to make a living at this. I'm going to be a big superstar and I'm going to main event Mania or nothing. I just, you got to start out looking at it as a hobby. And you don't want to, set your goals too high.
Right. But it seemed like you made a good choice going with Brad Reinigen. And here he was an Olympic wrestler with great success. He was just quite a Greco-Roman wrestler at the time. And he had this school. You decided not to go with Sharkey because I guess you saw that it really was just a wrestling school, and he was trying to make a living as well. But what was it about that camp? Because I know the reputation of what that guy had as far as training. Did you know what you were getting yourself into? Was that a conscious choice? You said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to try and really get with somebody who could teach me to do this.
Definitely. Because, watching the AWA, I knew of Brad's reputation. And when I heard that he had a camp, I jumped at the opportunity because I wanted to get trained by the best. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy because even the amateur wrestling, as far as the conditioning and the training, that was the most painful and hardest training of any sport I've done. And I did quite a few different sports. So I knew it wasn't going to be easy, especially the first day of camp when I was in there. Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos were there. The Nasty Boys were still there because they'd gone through the session before me. And so they were still there, living there, helping out. And they were in the ring wrestling and taking bumps and stuff. And I just could, the first day it just blows you away.
Yeah. So what was that camp like? Because it had a reputation for being one of the toughest. We hear about, Stu Hart and what he did to people, but this camp, as far as, and I've talked to other athletes before and many MMA athletes who come from college wrestling programs, and they say no matter what they've ever done, conditioning wise, nothing compares to the pain and these workouts that they went through. Was this somewhere along those lines? Tell us about what that camp was like.
Oh, it was rough. Brad didn't want to waste his time with someone who really didn't want it, so he would weed out whoever didn't want it, and not vicious or mean. It was just hard training. And he would also, he was one of the biggest shooters in the business, and he would also show you how submission holds felt, so you knew what a submission hold could do to you. And it was very, very educational. And like I said, it wasn't easy. We would start out running, I don't know how far, and come back. We were not allowed to get into the ring for the first few weeks. It was all stuff on the amateur mats. And even a lot of the conditioning was just amateur wrestling or rolling around on the mats. So it was rough. But like I said, he weeded out who really didn't want it.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about it, it was a very small class that you had. It wasn't like you had 15, 20 people. Maybe it started out that way, but
no, there was 4 of us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that you talk about individual attention. I guess.
Yeah.
But
I couldn't even tell you how many bumps we took because there would be one guy get in the middle. All right. Feed for body, 5 body slams each. Then another guy get in the middle, 5 body slams each. Another guy get, it was, and then we do the same thing with hip tosses, arm drags. It was rough.
It's interesting though that you come from a place like that, and somebody like Reinigen, who was you said like one of the toughest shooters out there. That's where he came from. That's what. And yet. You talk all the time about how important it is not to hurt each other. And that goes way back. You talk old school because you got to keep working. How did he separate that to where, like you said, he showed you what a submission move could do to you. But at the same time, as they used to say, you got to work like butter. You're not supposed to feel it. It's supposed to be. So how did you get trained that way from somebody like that?
Well, that's one thing. He really did emphasize safety and taking care of each other.
Uh-huh.
Especially if you're going to be doing it full time and working 6 days a week, you have to. And, what we do is dangerous.
Yeah.
But he would just, as far as educational, just let you know what a submission hold really can do to you. He wouldn't really crank on it as hard as he could or anything like that. He would just let you know and put a little pressure on and go, all right, this is what this feels like. And then, so when you would put it on, you would know, how much pressure, to use, so you really wouldn't seriously hurt anybody. Because, submission holds really can do some serious damage. But,
well, and you say,
like you said,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. But like you said, he really emphasized safety and taking care of each other.
One thing I've often heard you mention is one of the most important things that you need to do, and your advice you give to younger people, is that you got to sell. And did someone who was a gifted Greco-Roman wrestler teach you to do that?
Actually, Brad, he really, the first day of camp, he said, if you want to learn how to be a good worker, learn how to sell. Mm-hmm. That's there's quite a few things he said the very first day of camp that I'll never forget. And that's one of them. And it makes sense. And one thing he really emphasized too was psychology throughout the whole camp. He emphasized psychology once we started doing matches and telling a story.
Uh-huh.
But like the whole object of this business is to get the people emotionally involved, invested in your match and in you. And the only way of doing that is by selling. And, that's the biggest way. Like I'll tell guys when I do seminars, I'll say, if you want to learn how to be a good worker, I'll tell them, watch stuff from the 70s and 80s. And they go, well, it's boring. I said, well, you know what? People believed it was real back then. You know why? Because you had two guys in the ring selling their butts off for each other.
Yeah. And when you define that, it's not, as we say, it's not selling a move or how somebody did it necessarily. It's telling a story. And I think that some people don't understand that. And I think you just hit on it there because they said, no, it was boring. Well, when somebody would hold an arm bar on some guy for, a minute or whatever, and the story was being told. He didn't have to be tossing the guy all over the ring to do it.
Right. And, as you go through the match, you just continue the story. And a lot of times at the end of the match, it would all, come together and make sense, especially when a guy would say his arm was being worked on the whole match. Well, at the end of the match, he goes for his finisher and he can't because you've damaged his arm too
right.
much. He can't even hit his own finisher. Yeah. So that, there's a lot of different stories you can tell, but, you have to sell to get the people to actually, and there's a lot of guys who nowadays who think this is about going out and proving how tough we are. It's not. Yeah. And Brad said this the first day of camp. He says, if you do this for any significant amount of time, you will need surgeries because the human body wasn't made for this.
Yeah.
So it's, you may as well sell and get some mileage out of it because every time you hit that mat, you're doing a little bit of irreparable damage to your body.
Yeah. Well, many have said you only have so many bumps in you. And eventually you run out of them. And some it takes a little longer than others. Yeah. Throughout your career. So when you get out of this camp, how ready are you to actually become a professional wrestler? And what were those first experiences like?
Well, the one thing Brad taught was basic fundamentals. And it was up to you on your own time to go and try the crazy stuff. Which is smart on his part, liability-wise.
Right.
But he really made sure that you had the basic fundamentals down. It was repetition over and over and over until everything became second nature. But I still didn't feel like I was ready because it was 3 hours a night, 4 nights a week, for 3 months. And I personally wanted to make sure I felt comfortable that I was ready. So Brad would still let us come out even when he had the next session and stuff and work out, and I would go work out at Eddie's school too a little bit. And I just kept training a little bit longer, a few months longer, before I thought I was ready and felt confident.
And what were those first gigs? What were the first jobs you actually had?
My very first day I wrestled, it was for a TV taping for this, I think his name was Jim Cook, it was called IWA, was the independent, and it was a TV taping at an armory in New Ulm, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 3 matches the first day I wrestled. The first match was a tag match against this team called the Terminators, a couple of big boys. And the second match was a 6-man tag against Derek Dukes, Tom Zink, and Steve Olsenowski. And then the third match was a singles match against Tom Burton, a guy I went through camp with.
Mm-hmm.
So I was scared. I was nervous, scared, all the above.
Well, now you're performers. Now you're not just working out and doing the repetition. When you look, how long did it take you before you felt some level of comfort in this profession you had now chosen?
Oh, it was probably a while, because when I broke in the business, I was very, very shy. I had a hard time. I wouldn't even look at the people in the crowd. And I wish someone would have just grabbed me and shook me and woke me up and said, "This is showbiz. You cannot be shy. You have to get the people involved in your match." So that took a while.
Did you actually ever have to cut promos? I mean, there was TVs. Were you?
No, I was just a squash, just a jobber.
Yeah.
And after that, I was doing, like Tom and I, we'd go get the ring, go set it up at the Rochester Civic Center, do a few squash matches, tear down the ring, bring it back. And then I did a few TVs for WWF back then, but TVs were like 32 or 34 squash matches in a row, because they would get, 4 weeks of TV in the can. So starting out, it was just a lot of squash matches.
And you can learn a lot from them if you get a chance to work with good talent. And I know that I guess around 89 or so, you got an opportunity to work with the WWF at the time. How did that opportunity come about, and what did you learn from that experience?
I think they would give Eddie Sharkey a call and have him bring some guys in for the squash matches. So he got me in on those, and it taught me what a professional really was, because my first match there was a tag match against Big Boss Man and Akeem when they were the Twin Towers.
Yeah, wow, what a way to start.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how big these guys were, because first time I went in the locker room, I found a place, set my bag down, and was sitting there, and here's first guys I see is One Man Gang, or Akeem, and he's wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt, playing with a yo-yo.
Yeah.
And standing next to him was Rick Rude and Kurt Hennig. And I just couldn't believe how tall Gang was. And it was funny, they're waiting for their turn to play with that yo-yo, because back then there was no internet, there were no cell phones. It was whatever you could find to entertain yourself for the long days of TV. And then in walked Earthquake and Typhoon, and they were bigger. I couldn't believe how big these guys were. And then in walked Big John Studd, and he was bigger. And I'm just in awe. And then in walked Andre the Giant. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I am in a room with the largest human beings on the planet. It was just amazing.
Yeah, and you were.
I was just floored. I couldn't believe I was sitting there.
Yeah.
But that match with the Twin Towers, they talk about professionals. I didn't feel a thing, and it looked like they were completely destroying me.
Yeah.
Now, granted, if I didn't sell, they probably would have destroyed me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what they did to those people. But you mentioned go ahead.
It just made me realize what, Brad was talking about as far as taking care of each other and being safe, because those guys were working full-time schedules.
Yeah, and also they appreciated. They all at some point started where you were. All of these guys, and it was always kind of amazing to me how some would forget. And I understood what those matches were for. I mean, when we would do for Superstars and Challenge, we bring these guys in, and I don't know what you got paid. I mean, when they would bring these local guys in, and they would put them out there with a superstar, who in many cases would just destroy the guy, and it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't an experience like you had with Bubba and or Big Boss Man and One Man Gang. Um, and I just never really understood that because, I was certainly a total outsider of the business, but the people I learned from, like Gorilla Monsoon and Lord Alfred Hayes, and this great respect for the business was, I remember them telling me it's you take care of each other because these guys got to put food on the table for their family as well, and if you hurt them or they hurt you, you can't work, and everybody is on their own. You guys don't have. At that time, there were certainly no contracts. So I used to just kind of look and wonder sometimes at these guys that would just really just beat the living shit out of these guys, and they would just limp back into the locker room and disappear. But the other guys, like you said there, the ones that were successful, the best superstars in the history of the WWE were people like Big Boss Man and One Man Gang and those who really respected the business and understood it and took care of people.
Right. And there was some that I worked with that were a little more stiff and a little more snug, but I guess I was fortunate that no one actually went out and tried to beat the crap out of me.
Yeah. Well, and I know you've also talked about some of these other guys. I'm glad you mentioned Boss Man and One Man Gang, but you also talk about Meng and Barbarian, who we know the reputation of those two people, especially Meng, Haku as we knew him in the WWE, but those guys could look like they just absolutely destroyed people, and certainly could have done it, but weren't like that. And tell me a little bit about that experience with those guys, and then also others in the business that were the same.
Yeah, I worked with Ming and Barbarian in WCW, and they were just like Boss Man and Akeem. They were light as a feather and looked like they were destroying me. And they were two of the biggest badasses on the planet. But it's guys like that who really, it seems like they don't think they have anything to prove. And they just showed me again what professionals they really were.
Yeah.
And they were great at their craft. And I'm trying to think of some others that I've worked with. Rick Martel, when he was the model. And in AWA, I worked with Larry Zbyszko and Colonel De Beers.
Do you ever have a chance to work with Brett? Because Brett always prided himself in never ever hurting someone, seriously to where they couldn't work.
No, I never got a chance.
Yeah. But there were many, many, many of them along the way. And really, I don't know if we talk about it enough about that part of the business because, like I said, that was how you made your living. And if you were unable to do that because someone didn't protect you, that was, a really sad part of the business, that there were some people that were like that. But there were, like we just talked about, some of these guys that they just respected the business so much. So we talked about you working in the WWF at the time. I don't know if it lasted very long, but was that an experience where you said, kind of left with you saying, one day I'm going to be back here as one of these guys?
No, because back then I was still small compared to everyone. Majority of people were, still a bunch of big monsters.
Yeah.
So
and that was the size of the business then. That was all about big.
Oh,
men.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I never really had any, set any goals for getting there. I guess at the time, I was just plugging away, and I was really close friends with X-Pac, or Sean at the time, when he was the Lightning Kid. And we would get together every day and watch all kinds of tapes or whatever we could find of, Japan, Mexico, whatever. And we would just start implementing all those styles in our matches. And at the time, I really wanted to try and get to Japan. when they started using smaller guys like Liger and having their junior division.
Mm-hmm.
But
what was going on with Sean's career at the time?
I guess he was just doing indies around the Midwest, because we had a couple year feud. Even while I was doing the squash matches, we had a feud for a couple of years around the whole Midwest up there.
Well, you talking about GWF?
Well, what happened was with that, Sharkey and Dennis Carluzzo did a couple combined shows in Minneapolis, and had Sean work Sabu and I worked Candido, and Eddie Gilbert had been on the shows. And first, I think it was a winter over 90 and 91, Eddie brought me down to the USWA and I did the Memphis territory over the winter. Then the next winter, Eddie called up and he asked me and Sean if we'd want to do our feud down in Global in Dallas there. So we did it. And that's how we got down there, was Eddie Gilbert.
Yeah, but before that, I mean, you said you wanted to get to Japan, which you did, and so how did that opportunity come up, and what did you learn from that first experience in Japan?
Well, Bruce Kreitzman, a referee in Minneapolis, had been going to Japan and reffing for this. I think it was the Lucha company, UWF. I think it was called UWF or UWA, maybe. I can't remember, but. So he told Wally Yamaguchi about us. And so Wally came to the States and reffed a match between Sean and I, and he liked us. So they brought us over for that Lucha Style company and tagged us together. And we worked against, was Takayama and Hakiyoshi. Well, now they're Gato and Jado. Is that how you say their names now? Mm-hmm. But they were a tag team in that company then. And so they brought us over to feud with them. And it was a Lucha Style company. So it wasn't, your typical New Japan or All Japan or anything like that. It was more Lucha. But so I just set small goals to achieve along the way in my career. I tried not to set anything too high that was unrealistic.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very different type of work over there, though. I mean, I guess they call it stiff. Is that putting it mildly?
Oh yeah,
but
we were told, because a lot of the Minnesota boys went over there.
And had
a lot of their careers over there. Like, why am I brain farting his name? The big arm. He's a world arm wrestling champion, Scott Norton. And some of them guys. So we were always told, when you get over there, lay it in. Otherwise, they won't respect you, and then they'll eat you alive. So Sean and I, when we first got over there, we were just lighting everyone up. And then I realized some of them, they didn't like working like that. So we lightened up with the guys who, liked working lighter. But, you'd lay safe stuff in.
Yeah. And what about the crowd? So too, that was another experience. Although I don't know how big a crowd you had been used to working before that, but they may have been larger, but they're a very different crowd as far as how they react to what's happening in the ring.
Oh yeah, but we kind of knew from watching tapes. But yeah, they were very quiet the whole time until they see something they like, and then they'd applaud and ooh, whatever. Yeah. But when there's a big built-up feud or a big angle, boy, it's just amazing. After a near fall or something, they start stomping on the floor, and while they're yelling and screaming, it sounds like thunder roaring through the building. And when the first time I was over there and I saw a match like that live, I said, someday I'm going to have a match like that. Yeah. And the night I had that mask versus mask match against Grand Naniwa in Michinoku, it happened during that match. And that was one of those nights where I could not get to sleep till 5:30 in the morning. It was just an amazing experience.
Well, and it still seems vivid to this day. So
oh yeah, I still get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah. And so at this point, I don't know if when you come back, we're talking early 90s, working with the USWA. Are you starting to feel pretty confident in the ring? You feel like you're, I don't know, kind of getting to the point where there are other big opportunities you can see ahead?
Not yet. When I was in the
Really?
USWA, it was more of a learning experience for me
Uh,
and learning how to really work. And I would just still, listen to the veteran and do whatever they said, let them call it all out there. And back then, that's what you did. My first match down there, I worked Kenny Wayne from the Nightmares. Never met him before. And this down there, you had locker rooms on the opposite side of the building.
yeah.
So you did everything was called out in the ring. So it was just more of a learning experience. And so I just listened and did what I was told.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the working with Sean Waltman, and you both credit each other for really tremendously helping your careers. And what was it about working with him that worked so well?
He was willing to be creative and try new things. And it was at a time like he was smaller. I mean, he was taller, but he was skinny then.
Yeah.
And we were two small guys. And there was a lot of times back then you'd walk into a locker room at some indie show and all these big guys would look at you like, what are you doing here? Like you didn't belong,
Yeah.
And so there were people who didn't even want to work with us just because they thought we were too small to work with. So when Sean and I worked together, I mean, we both wanted to go out and be creative and come up with new stuff and have fun. And at the same time, we were pretty much best friends. We'd get together all the time and watch tapes, but we still had the people thinking we hated each other's guts.
Yeah.
So
Hey, not to sell.
I saw Sean last year. I can't remember where, but I told him, I said, to this date, that time was some of my favorite work because of that. We had the people thinking we hated each other's guts.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome that you guys have remained friends all these years, but also that you believe each one of you helped promote the other to the next level.
Oh, definitely, because at the time too, there were so many guys who were just happy with clotheslining, body slamming, hip tossing, and that was it. No one wanted to try anything new.
Yeah, but also it was an era where I remember in the late 80s with the WWF, and of course there were a lot of huge human beings, superstars there. But there was also a number of not so huge guys, people like Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, the Rockers, and a bunch of others that Brett was not a huge guy, and what they could do in the ring, it was really changing the business. And then also some great matches where you could have a big guy working against another guy because they were just so skilled, and you bought the fact that what they could do could take down a big guy. So it was. I just thought it was a great era in wrestling, and it sounds like you took full advantage.
Well, I realized I had to do what the big guys couldn't, so someone would want to hire me and bring me in.
Yeah, well, exactly. But there was pressure. I mean, it wasn't where a lot of the bodies we saw prior to that. You didn't even have to be cut in many cases, but you did in that period of time. That was when physiques were, no matter how big you were, and a lot of them were doing. I guess we call it. Juice or gas or whatever. Was there that pressure out there to do it even for the small guys, that you had to at least have a physique that was cut, I guess we'd call it?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, I guess I felt there was the pressure. So
nobody realized at the time either what it could do, what it was doing could do to your body.
Right. And there was a time where I said, all right, I'm going to do it and I'm going to get big. And I did some harsh stuff. I didn't realize the one was so harsh, the Anadrol. And one day I pissed blood and I said, all right, that's enough of that.
Really? That was
and,
it?
It wasn't, there was times over the years I would do like something that was more of a healer and a tissue builder just to kind of hold my body together. But I realized not too many years later, it didn't matter how big I got, it wasn't going to help further my career any.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, we talked with the Warlord last week, and there may have been taller guys than him, but I don't think I ever remember anybody being more massive. I just remember looking at him thinking, like, how much bigger can you get? And
Right.
he talked a little bit about that, and he was a soccer player when he was younger, and I just to imagine, him bouncing around on a soccer pitch would just doesn't seem like that could have ever happened. But man, I mean, that it was, and it was, and he hung with Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, and these guys could bench press cars at the time. And it was more,
Oh,
there was a
yeah.
group that just wanted to outdo each other. I don't even know if it was so much to, impress crowds. Do you
No.
remember that era of like what was going on in the locker room?
Oh, well, when I was in WCW and we do TVs down in Orlando, everyone would go to the gym. I couldn't believe these guys were warming up with 3 plates aside. It was crazy. That was a warm up. It was amazing how much weight they were pushing. And I always would joke around, and I'd always say, I don't think there's enough weight in this gym for Warlord. It was crazy. Or a lot of them even, like you said, Hawk and Animal, the Steiners, Ming and Barbarian. It was crazy the weight these guys were pushing.
Well, and you remember back in the day there when Mike would pick up these bodies, and these guys that he was going against, who weighed at least what bottom side would 220 maybe, and he picked them up like a bag of sand, like a 50-pound bag of sand. I mean, there wouldn't be that it was just like one lift, and the guy's over his head, and that isn't even weight. You know what I'm saying? With a body moves different. And for him to do that, these guys, the strength was just unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were, like I said, even behind the neck military presses, just, 4 plates aside. It was crazy the amount of weight they were pushing.
Yeah. But I think it was fortunate at the time that we did realize that the skill, and people were very entertained by what some of the smaller wrestlers, and that's not a knock, but they just didn't get the genetics to be that big. But it really enhanced, I think, professional wrestling all the way around, because you did have your monsters, and then you had the high flyers, and you had your skilled athletes, which I really feel that you kind of fell in between that. You were skilled, and then you could do the high flying moves as well. What are some of your most vivid memories, though, of some of those matches? Did you like working, say, with other high-flying tag teams or other singles, or did you like going up against some of these bigger monsters?
It just depended on who it was that I was working with, as far as how can I put this? How cooperative they would be. Or if they wanted to go out.
Yeah, I guess it was up to them, right?
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because some people are fun to work with and some aren't. And one thing Brad told me too, he says the secret to having a great match is if you and the guy you're working with try to make each other look like $1 million. And there's been a lot of times over the years, I'm working with someone that all they care about is getting their stuff in. So all they care about is themselves, and then it's no fun. And chances are the match is going to suck because all they care about is themselves.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times where it's difficult too in that perspective. So it just depended on who the person. It could have been a big guy. It could be a little guy. It could be different. Maybe they weren't all that great technically sound, but if they wanted to go out in there and have fun, then it was great.
Yeah. Well, and a big opportunity came for you in the mid '90s there, at a time when WCW was really starting to rise, and had some of the biggest names in professional wrestling there had come from the WWE. But you don't speak of that experience as something that you were really fond of that period of time, and why not? And first, tell us how it came about, and then why wasn't it a good experience?
Different reasons. I mean, I'm thankful for it. It was the first time I got signed with a major company, but I guess it was the first time I had encountered politics in the business.
Really?
On a real nauseating level. And I understood my spot there. I was just like, I wouldn't even say a fish. I was a guppy in the ocean, and because they had all the big guns there, they had the NWO and the whole 9 yards. So I understood my spot there, but and at that time, you soon realized, I mean, there was days where they wouldn't have the board up with the matches on it until 10 minutes before going live. Live worldwide TV. Why would you not have that up earlier? And it was just very unprofessional, I thought.
And it didn't give you much preparation time either.
That too. How are you supposed to go out there and give everyone a good match or whatever when you don't even know what segment you're in or who you're wrestling and how much time you have? And, so it made it very difficult and unpleasant at times.
And you mentioned the politics, and of course we have discussed it many times, but from your viewpoint, and as you said, as a guppy, what was going on in that locker room and backstage?
Well, for the most, it's hard to say. It was very cliquish.
Yeah.
And then certain superstars would always show up late. They'd have a big meeting rebuking everybody. Everybody show up on time. Well, the same superstars would still show up late. Nothing would be done. It's like, why don't you pull them aside and let them know,
Yeah.
But it was just stuff like that. It just seemed very, I don't know. All right, here's how it felt. It felt like no one cared. They were just there to get money out of Turner's pockets. And it just felt like no one cared. And
so how did it end up being as successful as it was? We know all about the 83 weeks. How did they pull that off then? Because, the more you hear about it, like, man, how was it all NWO? I mean, was it one great idea?
Boy, I could get myself in some big trouble here.
Okay. You don't have to.
Well, no, I mean, here's my observation. WCW had Scott Hall,
yes.
And what they have, he was the Diamond Stud, or what was he then?
Well, you had DDP, of course, was there, and that was...
No, I mean, this is before the whole end.
Oh, yeah, right, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then they had Kevin Nash, and they had him as, Oz and Vinny Vegas, and, it's like WCW couldn't figure out what to do with these guys. So they went to Vince, and Vince turned them into Diesel and Razor Ramon and turned them into huge superstars.
Yeah.
And then WCW just threw more money at them to bring them back. And after they were already made into big superstars. And so I think that it was just buying back the talent after they were turned into huge worldwide superstars.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, and it's discussed as ad nauseum. I mean, it's everyone trying to figure out why, but it happened. I mean, it was an incredible period in the history of professional wrestling. It changed it forever. In many cases, I think for the good, because it raised the bar way up for the WWE. It helped. It benefited the wrestlers in the point where they were. Their income levels were raised dramatically, and who had ever heard of guaranteed contracts before that? So,
right. Plus, it's the first time Hogan turned heel too, and that was a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, people are even showering the ring with debris, so it was good heat.
Yeah, and so for many of the fortunate that were among that elite, did tremendously well. More than they could have ever imagined in careers. But there were also other people that weren't in that league. They were not given that opportunity, or for whatever reason. And it probably was very difficult to be, there looking up at all what was happening.
Well, it just gets frustrating when the company lets you know you're not important. Not straight to your face, but in their actions.
Yeah. Well, that's that you can go on. We could probably name, I don't know how many, but where you had people that had it all, but it just never happened. Whether they didn't get the right gimmick or the right opportunity, or the list goes on and on. Injuries, and you were laced with them throughout your career. I don't know if at this point were they taking their toll on your body, because I don't know. One of the reasons that you left there in the end was because of an injury, right?
No, they let me go. When I first was going there, it was on a nightly deal, and I ended up messing my arm up pretty good. So I was home, I think, for 9 weeks. Mm-hmm. And luckily, when I was ready to come back, they signed me to a year deal. And at the end of the year deal, they just decided to let me go.
Yeah.
Well, what? Come to think of it, I did have a broken foot near the end there.
Yeah, boy. So when the chance to work for ECW came along, and a lot of people talk about what a great opportunity that was and a great atmosphere. Was it like that for you?
In ECW, it was, it was awesome. Yeah, it was more like a team effort. Everyone would cheer each other on. I mean, everyone would watch each other's matches on a monitor in the back, and there were a lot of times people would come back from a great match. Everyone would give them a standing ovation. All the boys.
What was different? What was different about it? That atmosphere was it a lot of people who kind of had been down the same road that you had been on, and here they had an opportunity to work with people that were management, and people like Heyman and Cornette, and were these people that helped you, and was it that kind of atmosphere with the other wrestlers that were there as well?
Yeah. One thing that I'll always give him credit for is New Jack. And this is, Paulie was having me do a promo, and I was just having a hard time with it. I wasn't really taking promos very seriously then. And after I cut it once, Paulie says, I can't remember, he says, all right, we'll stick with that one. But New Jack says, I don't believe you. And I said, what? He says, I don't believe a word you said. And he explained to me that you have to make the people believe what you're saying. And I wish someone would have told me that earlier in my career. But I thought that was so cool of New Jack, he was the first person to actually say something like that and actually try and help me with my promos.
Yeah.
But it was like a team effort there. Everyone was helping each other out and we were trying to build something.
Well, and you hear people like, Tommy Dreamer was severely depressed when that went down, when, it didn't succeed. Was it that great of a place to be a part of? And as far as, because, we talk about how the creative, you need that. These guys, you're performers. And if you're not given that opportunity to grow and be creative, then you get pretty complacent, and that's not good. So was it really that kind of atmosphere there?
Oh, yeah. You had total freedom in the ring, and that made it more fun. Like, there wasn't all that much, I don't know. I guess there was one time I'll never forget in WCW, I came back from a match, and I just got reamed right at gorilla position. And it really wasn't my fault because no one told me what they wanted.
Uh-huh.
And so I stood up for myself. But in ECW, you had a lot of freedom. You can go, and everyone wanted to go out there and just bust their butt and give the best they could.
So was Paul Heyman an influence on you? What was your experience like with him?
Paul, yeah, he, I just would watch him, and he was just so great at using people to their strengths and hiding their weaknesses. And it was just amazing to see how he would book people and how he would use them, and then how he would book the programs and stuff. He was pretty much ingenious.
And any others that were really a big influence on you there? Besides, you mentioned New Jack, but other ones that other people that.
I get, there's guys I really enjoyed working with there. Like I really loved working with Lance Storm and Just Incredible, Chris Candido, of course, RVD. The whole crew was great. Everyone was fun to work with there.
Yeah. And do you think that experience is what got you to the WWE again?
Well, actually, I had a tryout match with them prior to going to ECW. I had a tryout match with Taka Michinoku.
Yeah.
But JR told me at the time, he said, well, we're just trying to get this light heavyweight thing off the ground, so we can't promise you anything right now. And I understood that. Well, I think it was a couple of weeks after I started with ECW, someone called me up and says, you're on Raw tonight. I said, I can't be. I haven't done anything with them. They said, well, you're in the brackets for a light heavyweight tournament. And I'm going, really? They didn't even call me and ask me. So I called Paulie and asked him what I should do and whatever, because I already committed to ECW. Yeah. And I said, well, yeah, they want me to just, I can't remember who I talked to. It may have been Cornette. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But they wanted me to just work the first round, and that was it. And I told Paulie, he says, don't do it unless you're he said, I said, I don't want to do it unless I'm going up against Taka in the finals. He says, don't do it unless they put you over. I'm like, yeah. No, yeah. I told him really, it all came down to I already committed to ECW, and so I didn't do it. And after the tournament, JR called me and asked what happened. And I told him, I said, well, you told me, at the time you couldn't promise me anything, and I already committed to ECW. And JR understood. And he told me then too, he said, well, when you're done with ECW, I just want to let you know you have an open door here. And so when ECW folded, I gave JR a call, and he brought me on board.
And what was it like there at the time? We're talking 2001. What was the WWE like at that point? We'd seen the crust with the Attitude Era. What was happening there when you arrived?
Well, for me, it was kind of bad timing, because it wasn't very long after I got there and they bought WCW. So now they had twice as many guys as they needed, and then a lot of those guys were already big, built-up superstars. So I knew I was just a small fish in a big pond again. So I just, and it was very, if you let it, it was very stressful, because majority of the guys are walking around on eggshells, afraid of losing their job. And I wasn't going to let it bother me. And I just, just tried to no matter what I was going through, I always still tried to make it fun. Even if the politics were miserable, I still tried to make sure I was having fun when I'd get in the ring, and I'd hang out with guys who were fun on the road. So I didn't want to try and let it stress me.
Yeah. And that is it's a tough place to be when, in the WWE, because we talk about the limited number of people they have on the roster there, and you're just trying to get some time out there so that you can stick around.
Right.
I mean, what is the stress level when you're just trying to make it? You're trying to stay there. That's got to make it very difficult to have that fun, to enjoy it.
Yeah, and shortly after, right away they put the belt on me and said, you're going to be a heel, which confused me. I thought, well, I've been a face most of my career. Why all of a sudden am I a heel with no rhyme or reason?
Yeah.
And so it made it challenging. And then I dropped the belt to Jeff Hardy. And then after that, they just had me doing time filler matches for their little weekend shows, Jacked and Metal or whatever they were called. And then after that, I wasn't doing any of those. I was just doing dark matches with guys getting tryouts, and I knew this isn't good.
Yeah.
And about 6 months in, I got hurt in one of those tryout matches, needed knee surgery, and 3 months after my knee surgery, I got released. So,
man, are you thinking at this point?
For me.
Yeah, but are you thinking at this point? I mean, you kept working, but already at this point in your career, 2002, your body has taken a big toll. What kind of shape were you in, and did you do something that saved you, or did you just keep pounding away?
I guess I always trained hard, and I realized I started training more for endurance so my body could absorb all this punishment. But lower back was was hurting at times, and had the knee surgery and stuff, but I was still able to keep plugging away.
Yeah. I mean, TNA for a while, and was that organization a great experience for you as for those 5 years that you spent there?
At first it was, until Jerry left. Then it started not to become fun again. It was like all kinds of politics started kicking in again, and finally, I think and I got hurt, and they made me an agent for a little bit, and then started wrestling again. But after 5 years, I said it was time to go. I wasn't happy, and if I'm not, if it's not fun, why bother? So I asked for my release.
Well, as I said at the top of this conversation, I don't know if we've had anybody, and we've had well over 100 episodes of this, of somebody who's worked for more different organizations. I mean, I don't know if there's one you missed. What kept you going? I mean, and we're talking almost, into 3 decades that you were still heading in the ring. Why?
I love it. Once you get bit, you're screwed. Once it gets in your blood, you're screwed. You're done. And the first time at TNA was the first time I met Roddy Piper, and I ran into him at TGI Fridays, and I sat next to him and was talking to him a little bit. And I told him, I said, this wrestling thing's a real love-hate relationship. I said, sometimes I hate the fact that I love it so much. And he says, that's a great way of putting it. But because there's times where it gets very frustrating, but then I've always tried to make decisions to make it fun again, and that's what I tell the guys when I do seminars. Always make sure you're having a good time, because otherwise you're destroying your body. Why are you out there destroying your body then, unless you're enjoying what you're doing?
Yeah, and I tell you, it's just amazing. You look at the stops along the way. And of course, not even including all the different outfits you worked for in Japan, but WCW, ECW, WWF, WWE, all TNA and Ring of Honor, and it's just incredible, all the different places. I mean, I guess everybody's a journeyman, but man, you're the journeyman's journeyman, I think, is how somebody would describe.
I don't think people realize before I left Memphis, Cornette called me and asked me if I'd do his. I'd worked his first TV taping for Smoky Mountain. I worked Killer Kyle in a squash match, and then when I was in Memphis, actually, we did a couple combined shows with World Class in Dallas. So I've worked for quite a few of them.
Yeah, you have, and you mentioned that Smoky Mountain. That's another one we forgot to talk about, because that was also known to be a great place for wrestlers to go and be creative and develop.
I just did their first TV because I actually left. Oh, that was when I was in Global. I left Global because right before I went to Global, I had come back too soon from a broken ankle. So the whole time in Global, my ankle was bothering me pretty bad. Yeah. And right before I left is when Cornette called me and asked me if I'd do his Smoky TV. So,
and then he did you work with Jim a lot along the way, or I don't know if he helped you along the way? I mean, a lot of people talk about how he helped them.
No, over the
Really didn't get a
years,
chance. Yeah.
I didn't really get a chance to work with him a lot and bend
Yeah.
his ear. I know the first time I encountered him was in the USWA when they brought in the Fabulous Ones, and Cody Michaels and I worked them in a tag, and I had my first mark out moment, and I begged Jim to hit me with the tennis racket. So I got walloped.
Did he? Oh, good. Yeah, I want to make sure and he probably enjoyed doing it.
Nah, he took care of me. He didn't try and kill me, but no.
Yeah, take you out. Before we wrap up here, Jerry, I wanted to talk to you about, now, of course, you got this new adventure you're involved in with AEW, and we've kind of seen it take the independent world by storm with Cody and the Young Bucks. First, your thought on where they're going, and do you see it really having a great impact in the world of professional wrestling? Is it changing? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it already has.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it already has an impact because, first of all of a sudden you heard all kinds of guys with the Fed asking for their releases.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, this is the first time since WWE bought WCW where the boys have bargaining leverage as far as contracts and their jobs. So competition's good for business.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But I can't see this not working because
really,
I mean, behind the scenes, it's a great atmosphere. It's like a team effort. Everyone's rooting for each other. And they're letting the boys go out and have creative freedom, to a certain extent, but let them go out and do what they do instead of tying their hands behind their back, But so they're letting the boys go out and do what they do. And what really helps is the owner loves wrestling.
Yeah.
And that's a big plus right there.
Yeah. And credit to Cody and the Young Bucks and, a bunch of the other people involved there that they have created this world now in professional wrestling where these guys can make really good livings and, through merchandise and, these other social media platforms and all these different revenue streams where they have options now. It isn't just, I just hope one day I make it to the WWE. And I think that is what is just huge about it because they can actually think about it and make choices that they think are really going to be good for their careers.
Oh yeah, they're very smart and they're very creative, especially with the social media and the marketing. And it's amazing what they're doing with all this. Even their little vignettes and stuff with the road to fight for the fallen and stuff. It's just so creative and entertaining.
Yeah, it is. It's just fun to watch. And I've had the great fortune that I've been involved in the last two Starcasts, and so I've kind of been backstage in this scene and just taking it in from my viewpoint of my involvement in the 80s there. And it just reminds me a lot of that atmosphere where the wrestlers were allowed to really develop their characters. They could had a lot of creativeness were able to be creative when it came to cutting their promos. You didn't have somebody handing you a piece of paper. They might have a storyline they guided you along on, but when you went into that room or when you even your matches, it was a creative effort. And so I think that is why that product right now is so hot.
Right. And one thing I think that's different too is they're looking around the entire world for great independent talent that they see something in, and they're giving them a chance and they're creating some of their own stars.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because, like with WCW, we saw these already big superstars just go to another place. These guys they've got coming up, not that they didn't have huge followings before, but wait and see. I mean, with the TNT and television, you've got people that are just going to really explode on the scene, and they're going to become their own stars. And I think that's a really good point you just made, and I'm sure you could name a few already that are ones to watch.
Oh yeah, that Adam Cole and MJF. MJF's an amazing heel.
Oh yeah, he's such a great heel. He's gonna be.
Not Adam Cole. I'm sorry, Adam Page.
Yeah, Adam Page, right? But also you said
Adam Page. He's really gonna be something. And the other guys too, like that Scorpio, the Scorpio Sky.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great lineup, and folks, what I'm interested to see is that once you start the television, week after week, that's when it gets really tough. But I really think that these guys have what it takes, and I can't wait to see what happens.
Oh, when I go and get to the show, I'm just as excited as the guys are that get to get in there and wrestle. I'm just as excited. It's great to be a part of something right from the ground level and try and help build something. And I was just so flattered and honored that they wanted me to be on board.
Yeah, and with that, tell us about your involvement. How did you come in, and what are you doing with them?
Well, they're calling us coaches, but we're kind of the same thing as like a road agent, or basically you get told which segment that you're going to produce, and so you're almost kind of like a TV producer too, because you're producing a segment.
Yeah.
So
that's fun. Can't wait to see. Well, Jerry, this has really been enjoyable. I've loved chatting with you. How can folks get in touch with you? Do you have? I know that you talk about how you are so far behind in technology, but do you have an email or a Twitter account that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, I always swore I'd never get on social media until Mikey Whitworth and I started that Front Row Material podcast, and they said, now you got to get a Twitter so you can plug the podcast. Yeah. So I'm at It's Jerry Lynn.
At Jerry Lynn. That's pretty easy.
No, it's Jerry Lynn.
Oh, it's Jerry Lynn. Okay.
Yeah.
Folks, you hear that?
Jerry Lynn.
Okay. All right, Jerry. Well, I hope I see you down the road, and best of luck with everything with AEW. I think it's awesome that you're involved with it, and I can tell folks are excited that you're doing it. I read a couple of articles about the reaction to you being involved in all your experience, and I think you're going to help create some of these stars.
I hope so.
All right, my friend. I hope we chat soon. Thanks again for coming on Primetime.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.